Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Book Club of California's in-person and online program titled Eugene O'Neill and Long Day's Journey into Night at Tao House, a California Story. My name is Kevin Kosick, and I'm the Executive Director for the Book Club of California, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and host the program this evening. So for those of you that might be new to the Book Club of California, we are a nonprofit member and donor supported organization that is dedicated to preserving and promoting the history of the book and the book arts. Oftentimes we do that with a focus on the history and the literature of California and the West. Now, the book club publishes limited edition finely made books. We have a scholarly journal and newsletter called the Quarterly Newsletter, and we have keepsakes for our members. We host a year-round series of exhibitions and programs like the one this evening on topics including fine printing, design, typography, bookbinding, collecting, book history, book culture, California history, and much, much more. Now, if you're not a member of the book club or if your membership has lapsed and you're interested in what we do, please consider joining our century-long tradition. Our membership dues are modest. The benefits are many, and we simply can't do the work of the book club without the support of our members. So I encourage you to go online to bccbooks.org to find out more about the book club, to join, or to donate. And now for tonight's program. Tonight's program is titled Eugene O'Neill and Long Day's Journey into Night at Tao House, a California Story. Our speaker is William Davies King. Now, William Davies King is Distinguished Professor Emeritus of Theater and Dance at the University of California, Santa Barbara. He retired in June 2025 after 38 years of teaching theater history and dramatic literature at UCSB. His critical edition of The Iceman, Cometh was published by Yale University Press in 2020. His multimedia edition of Long Day's Journey into Night, also from Yale, won the 2017 Prose Award in Literature. Now, a former editor of the Eugene O'Neill Review, he has written several critical biographical studies of O'Neill, including Another Part of a Long Story, Literary Traces of Eugene O'Neill and Agnes Bolton, and Finding the Way to Long Day's Journey into Night, Eugene O'Neill and Carlotta Monterey O'Neill at Tao House. He has also devised a dramatic adaptation of that book titled Into Night, which was given a staged reading directed by Eric Fraser Hayes at the Tao House Barn and at the Eugene O'Neill International Conference in Boston in 2022. Now, William Davies King has a Doctor of Fine Arts in Dramatic Theory and Criticism and a Master's of Fine Arts in Dramaturgy, both from the Yale School of Drama. Now, for more information about our speaker and his scholarship and his artistic work, which is quite interesting, you can visit williamdaviesking.com. Tonight, our speaker will talk about Eugene O'Neill, his wife, Carlotta Monterey, and the home they built, Tao House, just outside of Danville, California. It was there that O'Neill wrote the most personal and difficult plays he had ever attempted, including the Pulitzer Prize winning Long Day's Journey into Night, which was written by O'Neill in 1939 to 1941. Now, if you have questions for our speaker, please wait until the end of the presentation. We should have time to take questions from you here in the club rooms and from our audience on Zoom. If you're on Zoom, you can use the chat and the Q&A functions on Zoom to pose your questions or your comments. We'll take questions again from you here in the audience at the club rooms and from you on Zoom. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, William Davies King.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you all book club members and visitors. It's very charming to see you all here. So you might be wondering why a book and a presentation about Eugene O'Neill and Long Day's Journey into Night would be a California story. And the answer to that is both personal and historical. The personal is partly to do with the fact that 38 years ago, I moved to California, started teaching dramatic literature and theater history with a specialty in American drama, what was then called American drama. And so, of course, I had to start teaching Eugene O'Neill. I had a long history of fascination with Eugene O'Neill that preceded that, but suddenly I'm in California and I'm teaching the play. This play very familiar to me, but unfamiliar to my students, and I'm looking for a way into it. And it occurs to me as of course, I'd read biographies and books about the play and so on, but it suddenly clicked that, of course, this play was written in California. Uh, and it began to sort of sit in my mind, like, in what way is this a play that has to do with California? If you know the play, it is a play that is set not in California, it's set in New London, Connecticut in 1912, an Irish-American family, a family that comes from a background of the New York theater. Eugene O'Neill's father was a great theatrical star, a romantic actor. And so there's a very New York background to this. Eugene O'Neill was born in a hotel room in New York, and he died eventually in a hotel room in Boston. But in the interim, at a certain point, he came to California. And this is where he wrote these late plays for which he is best known. Long Day's Journey into Night is a very explicitly autobiographical play that delves into his own family background at the point before he had written any plays. So he is a character in the play, and he's in his young early 20s. And the other characters in the play are his brother, older brother, and his mother and his father. And through the course of this long day, there is a gradual bringing forward of the past and painful, tragic circumstances of the past that lead to an emotional kind of configuration of this family that is fraught, to say the least. And it is a play that takes about 4 hours to perform in its entirety. It is this incredibly intense play, and it has been considered the quintessential American play. Tony Kushner called it the greatest American play ever written. And it is a play that is in some ways a play about the American theater, because it is a generational play about how out of the theater of his father, which was the theater of melodrama and romantic escapism, came the theater that Eugene O'Neill became known for, which was a serious drama. And so O'Neill has been considered this sort of key figure in the history of serious American drama, and a predecessor of both Arthur Miller and Tennessee Williams, both of whom honored and really respected O'Neill. So this is something that I had to bring to my California students. And of course, I was struggling. How do you make this connect? And a key moment came when in the 1990s, when I came up to the Bay Area here and took a tour of Tao House. You see on the cover of my book here, this is Tao House. The play was written right here. Also Long Day's Journey, also The Iceman Cometh, also A Moon for the Misbegotten, A Touch of the Poet, Huey, the plays that he's best known for at this point. And this is the house as it looks today. And it is part of the Eugene O'Neill National Historic Site and managed by the National Park Service. And you can go there and take a tour of this house, and you can actually go into this study right here where the play was written. So it was impressive to me that this play came from a suburban house. The house is on the outskirts of Danville, sort of in the extreme East Bay area. And it at that time was pretty much a farming community. But now, of course, it's a fully developed suburb. And anyways, some of my students, each time I taught it, would say, I'm from Danville. And, it's amazing how few of them actually had ever been to this house. It is a little remote, and you do need to sign up for a tour so that the National Park Service takes you in a little tour bus from Danville up to the house, and they give you a tour of it. And it's only open in the summer months. So over the years, I'm sure I've taught it 35 times in the last 4 decades. And I hope that I've at least introduced or opened the play to some of those students. O'Neill was already a key figure in my scholarship. And earlier on in my research of Eugene O'Neill, I was fascinated by the O'Neill of the earlier years when he was in his second marriage, roughly 1918 to 1928, and married to a writer named Agnes Bolton. And so I was fascinated by that because I realized as I was teaching the play to these basically adolescent students that there is something fundamentally kind of adolescent about some of O'Neill, that he was a writer who was emergent through his whole life, and in some ways a very reactive writer, very, acting out against parental figures. And so I thought there was a kind of intrinsic adolescent aspect to him. And I thought, because I could use Agnes Bolton's memoir of their marriage years, which she called Part of a Long Story, I could use that as a way of kind of getting at his adolescence. His marriage to Agnes was not a pretty thing, and it revealed some of the worst aspects of Eugene O'Neill's character. Some aspects that he eventually kind of outgrew, but so this is Agnes's book in an edition that I put out of it, subtitled Eugene O'Neill as a Young Man in Love. And then I wrote another part of a long story, Literary Traces of Eugene O'Neill and Agnes Bolton, as a way of kind of delving into this. And at that point, I kind of finished with this wife. And some of the people who were members of the Eugene O'Neill Society asked me, so are you going to go on to the third wife? And who was Carlotta. And so eventually I did do that. And a key moment, again, is when I, in the early 2000s, got signed up to write these critical editions of Long Day's Journey into Night, The Iceman, Cometh, and kind of have this opportunity to delve into these late and very, very great plays. And that brought me back again and again to reflecting on this house. And I kept coming back to it. And I came back to it partly because there were productions taking place in the barn on it. I'll show you a picture of the barn in a moment. But from the barn, and it really is just an old barn, but they've converted it into a performance space good enough that they actually performed Long Day's Journey into Night there. And I remember seeing that on a cold, windy night. And I was seated in a particular seat such that I could look through the barn door beyond the production that was going on, and I could see a light in this window right here to remind you of the proximity of the play to the house. Each time I came back to it, I kept feeling like there's a story in this house. The house itself is haunted in a certain way, but in a way that fits together with Eugene O'Neill's sense of drama. And so this house became the site or situation of my most recent kind of phase of research in O'Neill. And an important moment was in 2017. I was given an artist in residency named for Travis Bogart, who was a longtime great professor of English at Berkeley. and who was very instrumental in getting the house turned into a National Historic Site, and who wrote, I think, still one of the best critical discussions of Eugene O'Neill, and a very crusty man. I only met him once, and he was quite a crusty old fellow, but he taught me how to become a crusty old fellow, I suppose. But they very nicely named this artist in residency for him, and that enabled them to bring artists, but also scholars, to the house for a period of time to do whatever work. So this is a picture of Eugene O'Neill in 1940 at the house, and this is the courtyard of it. And you see this small building in the background here. That's what was called at the time when they were in residence here, the trunk room, because they stored luggage there. It was initially meant to be a guest room, but it was kind of not a very nice guest room. So they stored their trunks, their suitcases there. Well, the National Park Service and the Eugene O'Neill Foundation set this thing up such that these artists in residence could occupy this place. There's a desk in there, and essentially you could do your work in this place. And from this door of that trunk room to the place where the play was written was, I calculated, about 50 feet as the crow flies. So I was about as close as possible to the site of origin of this very play that had so haunted me. And out of that residency came the idea of writing a play that was about how this play not only was written here, but in some sense belongs in this house. How the play, though it is ostensibly about the Eugene O'Neill of 1912 and New London and the Irish American background, is just as much in certain ways about the Eugene O'Neill of 1939 through 1941. And in so many different ways. So this is a historical connection between California and this topic. So the play is set in 1912, so it's right on the verge of World War I. It's written in 1939 through 41, right on the verge of World War II. It's a play that begins with Eugene O'Neill being diagnosed with consumption or tuberculosis, so ill, and at a point when he had done essentially nothing. He'd written some poetry, but he had not really met any kind of life goals, not to his expectations. And you could read the play itself as the moment of his transformation into the person who could eventually write the play. But then it took him 25 years to get to the point when he actually did write the play. And at that point, he was suffering from a neurological disease. And so he was facing his own mortality and the end of his capacity to write. He had a terrible tremor in his hand, and he was essentially locked in as a writer shortly after this. So this was in some ways, kind of nearly his last play. So we have a beginning and an end that is in this story. And in other ways, I thought there were ways that it kind of fit together in some ways. The play is very much about the parents and two problematic children, sons. And at this point, when he wrote it, he was a parent and he had two very problematic sons. And so in some ways, I felt like, though he's writing a play that takes his memory back to the past, in some ways it's a play that is churning up and using the material, the emotional and life material of what he was going through at that time. And that's the gist of the play. But I had to find a way into the house to get this. I kept looking at that window and I said, somehow the play got into that space so that it could be written, and then it got out. And the story of how it got out is equally extraordinary, because he wrote this play, such a personal play, and he decided immediately that it should not be published or produced until 25 years after his death. And so eventually there's a story of how it came out, and I'll get to that story in a little while. Um, but but in a way, the play eventually got out of that house, but it wasn't an easy way. And so the whole notion of the way became fascinating to me. And if you know Taoism, you know that the word Tao can be translated. Well, really, it can't be translated according to Taoists, but a way of translating it is the way or a way. Um, and so I felt like there was something about the name of the house and something about the configuration of the house that that invited a way in that was the conventional way. Um, and I somehow needed to find that. This is Eugene O'Neill at the really right around the time when he wrote the play, sitting in his study, the most kind of innermost room of the entire house. Um, he's looking out the window at Mount Diablo. Um, and but this space of the study is something that became very important. What happened in that space that enabled him to write this play? If you look back through his notebooks and so on, you see that he had the idea of writing an autobiographical play that would have dealt with some of this material going back into the 1920s. And it came up again and again and again, but it was not until this late point that he decided that he actually resolved to write it. Um, and this is the way that study looks now. And the desk to the left is the actual desk that he was writing on, and the desk chair is the actual desk chair. The one on the right is not the same. But there was an interesting thing about the way he approached his writing. He used one desk for the play he was writing at the current time, and then he used the other desk for the plays that he was going to write. And so really the transit between these two desks was a point of flow, really like, how do I bring something out of the past into the present such that in the future it will be a play? So I felt like this study itself was a generator of time and of creativity. All right, let me go back to another personal dimension of this, which is that I first read the play when I was 14 years old, and I was a student at this prep school, and I was living in this room, what we called in those days a psycho single, which was kind of fortunate because the other rooms were doubles and they were chaos. It was just a bunch of first year students, oh, but I had the privacy of this psycho single. And so one Saturday night, I read Long Day's Journey into Night as a course assignment. And I was just completely overwhelmed by this play. It was such an overwhelming, eye-opening experience. I grew up in Ohio. I had no background in the theater or literature or anything like that. But when I read this play, it suddenly occurred to me the power of what literature, of what drama can do. And it literally changed my life. That next day, Sunday evening, I read the play again all the way through. And by the time I graduated from this prep school, I had read all of O'Neill's plays and whatever books I could find about O'Neill. And I became a little obsessed with Eugene O'Neill. Then when I went to college, grad school, I put him aside entirely. And actually, while I was at Yale Drama School, most of American drama was considered third rate at best, and O'Neill was considered completely passé, and so nobody paid any attention to it. When I was a freshman at Yale, I wrote a letter to the editor of the newspaper, that Daily, what's it called, Daily Nexus, and on O'Neill's birthday, and I said, I would not believe that there isn't some event to commemorate the birth of Eugene O'Neill here. Because I knew that Eugene O'Neill's papers had gone to the Beinecke Library there, and Eugene O'Neill received an honorary degree from Yale, and his teacher of playwriting. The 1 year of instruction in playwriting he had was actually at Harvard, but the teacher he had, George Pierce Baker, was the guy who was brought to Yale to be the first dean of the Yale School of Drama. And so in so many ways, Yale was the place of Eugene O'Neill. And here, October 16th was passing and nobody was paying any attention. I couldn't believe it. Actually, they published the letter, which was, I don't know. But
what year was that?
The letter,
Yeah.
that would have been 1973 or 4, something like that. So, okay, so the play has meant a lot to me through these years and finding a way into it. Here's an image of the first edition, and the paperback at that time was the same image. And Yale University Press was the publisher of it. It was the only only university press to be on the book list of Barnes and Nobles and B. Dalton and some of those stores. But I loved this picture, and that picture itself had a lot of weight. It was taken by Carlotta. And so it was very moving to me to be selected to do this critical edition of the play, and then this multimedia edition. And the thing that's cool about the multimedia edition is it's an interactive text, so you can search everything, but there are also supplementary materials, all the notes and diagrams and background materials, a whole archive of material in there. But I also created little walkthrough videos of both Monte Cristo Cottage, where the play is set, and that's also a National Historic Site. And I just, in a 4-minute movie, kind of walked through that so that you could see the imagery that was in his mind when he conceived the play. And then I did the same thing for Tao House. And that really brought me into thinking about its configuration, its architecture, and so on. And so I kept coming back to this place. And in this room, this trunk house, this is the front door of the house. And somehow I had to find my way into that front door to find the play that was in there. You notice something unusual about the front door is it's not front facing, it's side facing. And if you go back, well, oops. You can see aspects of the garden here. And it's a curving pathway that you need to take to get to that front door. And as I delved into the reasoning behind how this house is set up, I kept coming into ideas about Taoism and about feng shui. And Carlotta, especially, she grew up in the Bay Area. She was very interested in Chinese art and Chinese culture and Chinese philosophy. And so she had a background in that. O'Neill in the 1920s wrote a play called Marco Millions, which is about Marco Polo coming to the Chinese court. And so he also had an interest in Eastern religions and Taoism in particular. And when they came to design this house, which happened just after he won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1936, and they had decided to escape the East Coast entirely and come to the West Coast. And they built this house then in 1937. And they built it as much as possible to conform to Taoist ideas about how structures should be built, and gardens especially. So having the door that way is part of it. The actual moment, the sort of key moment when the play comes to mind, comes to us from his work diary. This is an image of it, June 6, 1939, Tao House. And here's another image of that same date. He writes, read over notes on various ideas for single plays, decide do outlines of 2 that seem appeal most, and see. The Jimmy the Priest house, the Jimmy the Priest hellhole garden idea, that's the idea that became the Iceman Cometh, and New London family one, that's the Long Day's Journey into Night. Going right along with it, And the whole copy of Carlotta's diary is at the research library associated with this house. And so I read through her whole diary, and here's what she writes just a couple of weeks later. Terribly hot day, 98 degrees in the shade. We know what that's like. Jean works, lunches, and we rest. Later in the afternoon, Jean prunes the hedge and then swims. Personnel out. I prepare supper. Jean talks to me for hours about a play in his mind of his mother, his father, and his brother, and himself in his early 20s in New London, autobiography. A hot, close, sleepless night, an ache in our hearts for things we can't escape. And if you know that play, that sense that the past is something that haunts the present is very much through it. So there are these two diaries that I could use to discover and have at least some sense of the map of the time when the play was actually written. And it turns out it was 147 days that it took to go from the earliest notes about it, an early scenario, to the first draft, to Carlotta typing the first draft, to then a second draft, another typing by Carlotta, and then a few adjustments beyond that. So 147 days. And I thought, well, that's interesting in itself, just to have a tangible kind of feeling of that time and use those two diaries. And so this is the Monte Cristo cottage where the play takes place. And their marriage began in 1929, and the first 2 years of it were spent in Europe. But after they came back from Europe, they went through New London and made a special detour to look at this house. And that shows that it was in his mind. And if you look at his notes for Long Day's Journey into Night, you can see that he did a diagram of the house. And this is an extremely accurate, down to the foot practically, diagram of the house that he remembered from his childhood. The play takes place in this room, but the stairs going up to the bedrooms plays an important part in the play. And then this is another diagram he did of it, showing the configuration of the furniture. And this series of X's describes the entrance of the mother character, Mary Tyrone, at the end, coming in, bearing her wedding dress. Now it's midnight. The family is, well, the brother is passed out from drunkenness. The father and the Eugene O'Neill character are trying to sleep. They're haunted by the fact that the mother has returned to her drug addiction, a morphine addiction. And so this has not been a good day. The young man has been diagnosed with his consumption on this day. It has unveiled a whole series of nightmares, and this is where it comes to an end. This is the image of the room in Monte Cristo Cottage, and the play really revolves around this table, a configuration of 4 chairs around the table, a representation of the family. And then there's a writing desk in here. And so there's the sense within the play that Edmund, the young character based on Eugene O'Neill, is already someone who is going to be the writer who will come up with this play. And this is the living room at Tao House as it looked in 1940 when the play was being written. And what I looked at this and I said, well, the play could be set in this room also. And in some ways it belongs in this room. And in terms of where the dining room is, in terms of the proximity of the servants, in terms of the bedrooms upstairs and the notion of a spare room where Mary Tyrone goes to return to her drug addiction and so on. All of this in some ways maps onto this house. And so this is the way the room looks now. And they've done their best to kind of recreate the furnishings of it. You can see some unusual things about the house, like this blue painted ceiling, and various other rooms are painted in this way. And it's picking up on Taoist ideas, feng shui ideas about color. There's a giant blue mirror here behind the couch. So there are these ways that color coding, color symbolism work into the thinking of this place. And you can see that there's a basically Chinese motif in the decorations. Most of this furniture came from Gump's. And Carlotta knew Mr. Gump from the point when she was a girl, and she remembers Mr. Gump bringing her Chinese pajamas to wear. And here is the front gate of it, and you can see that they came up with some Chinese characters that arguably read Tao House. Chinese people who read Chinese tell me it's pretty poor Chinese, but at least that was the intention. And here you can see the configuration of the hedge work here, and that was meant, and not in a very sophisticated way, but in a way that was sophisticated for the 1930s, to bring forth Taoist ideas. Here you can see a picture of them at Tao House, and he's for some reason decided to put on his Chinese robe, and I think she has some Chinese kind of outfit on here. This is the steps going up to the bedrooms and up to his study, and you can see that there's a theatrical kind of motif in the decorations, a lot of theatrical masks in this. Okay, so another aspect of it, though, that I found crucial was we think of this as Eugene O'Neill's Long Day's Journey into Night, but it was Carlotta who came up with the name of Tao House. It was Carlotta who was the one who sort of pushed for the Taoist aspects of the design of the place. It was Carlotta who, if you read those diary entries, was the one who created the safe and secure and quiet enough and peaceful enough place that this play could come forth. So in some ways, I felt like she is written into the play also. And in fact, she felt that he had in certain ways stolen part of her character in writing the character of his mother. So that there was this fusion of the past and the present. And I go so far as to suggest that there is even a kind of collaborative aspect of this, that out of a very, very stressed life, and this was a terribly stressed moment in his life. The oncoming war was extremely disturbing to him. And he wrote the first draft of Act One. And at that point was when France was invaded and Paris was occupied. And he became obsessed with listening to the war news, and he stopped writing the play for about 6 weeks. And in his diary, he just writes war obsession over and over and over again. In some ways, he might never have finished the play if summer hadn't come along and if conditions hadn't enabled him to sort of overcome the stress of that. The medical condition he was in was highly stressing. Aside from this tremor, he had prostate issues and all kinds of things. He was only 51 years old when he first came up with the notes of this. So he wasn't a very old man, but he was acting like an old man already. And in fact, by 1943, he was not going to write another word. So I felt like Carlotta's role in this was very important. And the more I delved into her story, the more I realized that there are aspects of what she brought to the play that are fused into what the play is as well. So Carlotta grew up in Oakland, and her mother ran a series of boarding houses in San Francisco. She had one boarding house that was running in 1906. And you can imagine how, and it didn't get destroyed in the earthquake. And you can imagine how good it was for a boarding house to survive that condition. So she essentially flipped boarding houses for a number of years and had more and more kind of elevated, well-to-do clientele in those boarding houses. Her father was quite a distant figure in the past. He was in the fruit business, the orchard business, and his life was centered in the Sacramento Valley. Yuba City was where Carlotta's mother and father were married. And Carlotta's mother, Nellie, had no patience for that life. And the husband she'd married was something like 12 years older and a angry sort of man. And so by the time Carlotta was 4.5, they were separated. And essentially, Carlotta was raised by an aunt and uncle in Oakland. And then she was sent to a convent school in Rio Vista, so just up the Sacramento River. And the whole notion of having a background in a convent school is something that the mother character in Long Day's Journey into Night returns to in her memory over and over and over again. And so that's another thing that Carlotta kind of brings to this. Then when she graduated from that convent school, she had the idea that maybe she wanted to be a singer or maybe an actor or something. And her mother financed her going to London to study with Sir Herbert Beerbohm Tree, who was a major Edwardian, late Victorian actor. And he was founder of a drama school. In fact, the school that eventually became the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and through some tangled set of linkages. And she went there for 2 years and studied theater and singing. And while she was there, she met a Scottish gentleman, somewhat older. And she was learning to be, whatever she needed to be on the stage at this school. But she was also learning to be a lady, a fine lady, by her association with this gentleman, but not quite at the marriageable level. And so without their getting married, but just at his kind of suggestion, she went to Paris for a couple of years to a finishing school. And she studied French and German and art and all the things that were necessary to sort of put her into the lady class, I guess. And then they married. But that didn't last very long either because his money ran out. And but by then she was already considered a beauty and had some theatrical talent and skill. And so she came to New York and started acting on the Broadway stage. And for the next, that's about 1915, 1916. And for the next 10 years, she acted in quite a number of Broadway productions, never as the leading, at least never in any production that actually made it beyond previews as the leading lady, but always as the vamp character, typically, and the femme fatale. But she was also photographed as a fashion model. And those of you who are in the room, I invite you to come up here and look at the photo archive and memorabilia and stuff that I brought here that has to do with her various phases of her career. As Kevin mentioned, I'm a collector, and one thing that I became out of this project is a collector of everything to do with Eugene O'Neill and Carlotta Monterey at this point of the. So anyway, please come up and look at that. Anyway, so she figures into my book in a big way. But how? I mean, I've already talked about some dualisms here. 1912, 1939, World War I, World War II. mother, father, there are all these dualisms that are at work here. But in some ways, it was not dualism that I needed to use to find this play at Tao House. Instead, what I needed to use is the variation on dualism that Taoism represents. And here in this mandala, in a way, you can look at this picture, the central part of it, and say, long day's journey into night. There's the darkness that threads into the night and into the light and so on. And so it's that multiplicity that isn't oppositional that I felt was coming forward in this play. And I felt like this is a rare moment, in fact, maybe a unique moment in his life, when though he was very much raised as a Catholic and raised in a dualistic Western kind of humanistic frame, that there was, in this moment of writing this play, something of a different energy and a different flow that had to do with bringing the past into the present, and that I needed the imagery and the ideas of Taoism to make that point. Here you can see an image looking from the house back toward that gate, and you can see some of the aspects of like the stone wall here attempting to kind of capture the configuration of the landscape. A mountain behind on one side of the house and a mountain on the other side of the house, east and west. And so those dualisms are at work as well. And in that place, in that house, was where this energy could be concentrated. So that was my way of getting into this door. And the book that I wrote eventually uses that. Now, a book is intrinsically dualistic in a certain way. There's always the recto and the verso. There's this oppositional way a book works. So in writing this book, I realized, and it was in some ways a reckless decision, that I needed to reconfigure the book in order to capture this argument. And most books work in a linear way from the beginning to the end. I decided that this book should be split, and I'll show you some images. Well, let me skip ahead here. So this is an image from my book. You can see those diary entries on one side. So on the left side, we have diary entries, and on the right side, we have my chapters. So in a way, what we have is a chronicle of the play on one side of the book and a history of the play on the other side of the book. And neither is really adequate. And what I do in this way is kind of frustrate the process of reading, because do you read just the right-hand page all the way through and then read all the left-hand page? Well, maybe. Do you alternate back and forth? Well, maybe. I further complicated that by insisting on footnotes on the page, so that the annotations of it, and there are many, are at the bottom of the page. So you can't just linearly go through the page. You have to go down to the bottom. And so complicating this was my way of capturing something of the complexity of how you get to this argument. And even argument isn't quite the right word, but this discovery of the configuration of the play. And the consequence was that Yale University Press said, we're not publishing that. And other presses said, you churn it into a conventional monograph or forget it. So eventually I got Anthem Press, which is a very nice press, to publish it and do it the way I wanted it done. But one of the consequences is it's $110 per book. So it was an expensive book to produce, let's put it that way. But I felt it was worthwhile. All right, going back a little bit, the play eventually, of course, did get out of the house, and eventually it was, and the last part of my book is really about using Carlotta's diaries from the moment after Eugene O'Neill died in 1953 to the point when Carlotta, as the executor of the state, kind of overruled that command that he put in to have the play withheld for 25 years. And she said, well, no, we're going to publish this play. And it was published in 1956. And then the world premiere was given by the Royal Swedish Theater. And then the New York premiere was given later in 1956. And so the play came out at that point, and won the Pulitzer Prize, the fourth time that Eugene O'Neill won the Pulitzer Prize. And this particular program, I have it over here. I could not resist this from an eBay market because it's just a program of the production, the first production, but it's signed by Richard Nixon. Somebody was in the theater and recognized that Vice President Richard Nixon was sitting a couple of seats away and said, would you sign my program? And so I managed to get that little token of the past. But here we are standing on the balcony just outside the study where the play was written, looking out over that courtyard, and you can see that barn in the distance there. And really, in some ways, this historic site continues to be a place of revitalizing Eugene O'Neill. Long Day's Journey into Night did not need that help. It's been revived many times. It's won the Tony Award for all sorts of performers, including, Jessica Lange and Vanessa Redgrave and Frederick March was the original James Tyrone. And many great actors have performed in it. But the rest of O'Neill's work, with the exception of the Iceman Cometh, is less well known, but it continues to resurface in this barn. And those plays are performed there. Here's an image of a production that I was happy to be the dramaturg of. And we positioned the members of the company in the courtyard at Tao House to sort of suggest how it belongs exactly there. And as Kevin mentioned, I also took this opportunity to write a play that I call Into Night, which is meant to be staged in the house. And really, that is the only appropriate place to perform it, with the audience in that living room. And it takes place in 1939, and Eugene O'Neill and Carlotta are there. And, Eugene O'Neill goes upstairs to write the play, and it's in his mind. And of course, therefore, the mother and father have come to occupy the house. It takes a while for Carlotta to recognize, oh, these characters are living with us. And eventually the brother character, Jamie, is in the house as well. So that was my attempt to dramatically carry forward this same argument, we could say. And so that's the book. And let me see what time I have. Ooh, okay. I think maybe I should just stop right there.
Take some questions and talk.
Yes, I would love to take questions. Yes.
So they built the house.
Yes.
Why did they buy this site? She was from the Bay Area. She
Yes.
thought she originally to return to.
They looked at various places so this is 1936 when they moved here. And it was hard to find property, but they looked at places in Marin and they knew they wanted to be out of the city and have a quiet, large, nature-related place. The ecological aspects of it, I think, are part of the play as well. So that's the answer. Well, there was a little old ranch house. It had been a walnut, orchard, and they raised cattle there as well. That's why the barn was there. But yes, they demolished the house and built this new house. Yes.
Why didn't he want the play produced for so long?
Well, it is very revelatory of the skeletons in the closet, you could say, the secrets and the darkest aspects of the family history. Not many people knew that his mother had this morphine addiction, which she actually overcame in the year like 1913, a year following the time when the play was set. But so there was a lot of, ugliness being revealed about the family. And also at that point, his older son, Eugene O'Neill Jr., was a Yale classics professor and already on his road to suicide, which is where he wound up. And they felt like maybe this would disturb his career or something. His second oldest child, Shane, was just graduating from high school and was really kind of aimless, directionless, kind of like a character in the play in his way. And so he wound up as a suicide also. And then his third child was Una, who eventually married Charlie Chaplin. And that whole wedding, that whole marriage kind of got, formed at the point when they were living in this house. And he then cut her off entirely. And she lived out her days in Switzerland at the Charlie Chaplin house there. And eventually she kind of came to a suicidal end as well after. What?
He didn't like Charlie Chaplin? What did he cut it off?
Well, it was complicated. He knew Charlie Chaplin from the early days of his being a playwright at the Provincetown Playhouse. So this is the 1910s in Greenwich Village. And it is even possible that his second wife, this Agnes Bolton, might have had some kind of a fling with Charlie Chaplin. So it felt incestuous. It just felt incestuous, I think. And also he felt she was getting attached to him right in the war years and it wasn't serious. And he felt disappointed in her and cut her off entirely.
Do we have another question here in the room?
Yes.
This is just along the timeline then. So the house, they moved in around 36.
37
and
at the beginning of.
lived until about 53.
Yes, but they only
That's my
stayed in the.
That's my question. Like,
Yeah.
when, in that timeline, when were they resident of the house and all of that?
So they stayed in the house from 1937, moved in right on January 1st, and then were there until 1944. But at that point, it's still the war years. They had a hard time getting help. And so they decided to leave the house. They sold it at that point and moved to New York. And things only got more unhappy after that, really miserable. And eventually they moved to Marblehead, Massachusetts, and he died in a hotel in Boston. So, yeah.
You said she was his third wife. So can you say a little bit about his first two wives? A little bit more about
O'Neill's first two wives, his first wife he married in 1910. So that's before the time the play is set. He got her pregnant and essentially his parents disapproved and they signed Eugene O'Neill up on a gold mining expedition to Honduras as a way of just sort of, doing away with this marriage. And there was a divorce case in 1912 that involved such degrading for Eugene O'Neill, such degrading revelations of his own life that he arguably for that reason attempted suicide himself. Anyway, so that's part of the grim past here.
what happened with that child?
That child is the Eugene O'Neill Jr. who became the classics professor. He didn't know he was Eugene O'Neill, and he wasn't named Eugene O'Neill until he was like 12 years old. And then his mother told him, "Oh, your father happens to be this famous playwright." Yeah. So, and the second wife is Agnes Bolton. She wrote for pulp magazines, and was quite a proto-feminist and very much the inspiration behind, if you know his play Beyond the Horizon. He dedicated the play to her, and that was his play that kind of was most informed by the kind of story that she was telling. And so they had a kind of collaborative, we want to be professional writers relationship. But by the mid 1920s, when he was seen as this serious artist, although a drunkard, and not somebody who overcame his alcoholism until 1920, end of 1925. And she did not. So the marriage ruptured at that point. And
With one child? One child?
they together had Shane and Una. So those are the three children. Carlotta had a daughter, Cynthia, who was living in Lafayette at the time when they were at Tao House. And then when her mother, Nellie, died, they left her some money and they built a house in Sausalito and lived there. And they had one child, Gerald Stram, and he died just a couple of years ago. And I got to know him, and he had all sorts of things from the O'Neill house. And some of this stuff was put on auction just a few months ago. And I bought some of it on auction. Some of it's up here, actually, like a photo album of Carlotta in the 1910s when she's marrying this Scottish gentleman.
That's not O'Neill's. Okay.
No, this is Carlotta then.
By the previous marriage.
Yes. And she had 4 marriages total.
After O'Neill?
No, that was the final one. Yes.
About his IWW politics later in life, or like whatever happened with that? I know that was an early part of his life.
Can you repeat the question for Zoomers?
Wondering about his IWW politics. And you probably are thinking of his play, The Hairy Ape, from 1922-23. Well, he was a member of the Seamen's Union, but I don't think he was actually a member of IWW. But the main character in The Hairy Ape, goes to the IWW office and wants to be a violent radical. And anyway, that play, extraordinary play, wonderful kind of piece of American expressionism. And when it moved to Broadway, Carlotta played the role of the young sort of woman clad in white lace who goes down to the stoke hole of this ship and sees this hairy ape, this man who believes in the power of steam and the power of automation and things like that, and he's covered with soot. And so it's a confrontation of, you could say, Black Irish and White Irish, the sort of white curtain Irish. And that there's that, yeah, that's the word, yeah. Anyway, the play, and so it's ironic that Carlotta happened to play that role. That was the one role, that was the one play she was in that anyone at all remembers now.
Was that before she knew O'Neill?
Well, she came to know him at that exact time because he was there when she was sort of auditioned or brought into the cast. And they had a meeting then, and she considered him the rudest man she had ever met. And it was just, I was just reminded that she noticed that he had like a hole in his socks. And she felt like this is a man who's not very well cared for. And so a few years later, she encountered him at a summer resort in Maine, Belgrade Lakes. And that's where an affair began. And part of the affair was when he came to New York, she took him to Abercrombie and got him some new underwear and socks. and he felt, well, this is a woman who could take care of me. And one of the things I brought up here is his inscription to Carlotta of the manuscript of Morning Becomes Electra, his play from 1931. And the signature of it, let me just get that. It's a long and extraordinary inscription, but the end of it is well, it's not actually. He calls her mother, wife, mistress, and collaborator at that time. So, and that, makes your skin crawl a bit, but there was a way that she was as much a mother figure to him as she was a wife figure. And that factors into Long Day's Journey also.
We're gonna do one last question
Okay.
to wrap up and give people some time to look at this.
Okay.
And it actually has to do with the film, because I think many of us here have seen the film.
Yeah.
In the 60s.
There are several.
And maybe you could point something out that's in the film that now we might recognize or make the connection with book and Tao House, or what's missing from the film that you came across as part of your research for Tao House.
The film was directed by Sidney Lumet, and it's actually a very, very good film. It stars Katharine Hepburn and Ralph Richardson and Bradford Dillman and Jason Robards. So Jason Robards was in the first production of it in 1956, also playing the older brother. And he became very associated with Eugene O'Neill in performing it. So the cast is excellent. The directing is excellent. There are a few kind of things that Lumet does to open it up as a film. Like there's a scene that takes place in the garage. But for the most part, it captures the steady progression into night. The final scene of it, when Mary Tyrone is coming in and doing this final monologue, Lumet has the whole family in a kind of sound stage, and he pulls the camera back so that there's this little pool of light, and you eventually see the family in this little pool of light surrounded by massive darkness. It's a beautiful, beautiful image. And so I think it's actually quite a fair representation of it. There are others, though. There's one that came out in the 80s with Jack Lemmon playing the role of James Tyrone, and with Kevin Spacey. And anyway, so Laurence Olivier, there's a version with Laurence Olivier that I would not recommend. So, yeah.
Great. Well, with that, join me in thanking our. I'm going to jump on here to say goodbye. So again, thanks to our speaker, William Davies King, and thanks to you for attending this Book Club of California program. Really great having you here in person and joining us on Zoom. We hope you'll join us for another program, either live in person or virtually on Zoom. You can register for all of our programs at bccbooks.org/programs. So go check it out. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. If you're here in the club rooms and want to come and look at some of the materials, please make your way up here. If you're joining us on Zoom, sorry, you can't see any of this stuff. You're missing out, but thanks for joining us on Zoom anyway. So have a wonderful night, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you soon.